The Los Angeles Clippers were probably the most disappointing team in the 2020 NBA bubble. With expectations to win a championship, the Clippers would blow a 3-1 lead in the second round to the rising Nuggets, in embarrassing fashion too. And now they have a lot of questions that need to be answered this offseason. One of those questions involves Paul George, who had an atrocious playoff run and was a big reason why the Clippers fell short. Now the Clippers have a tough decision to make on their hands, and the result of it could make or break their success in future seasons. In today's video, I'll be taking a look at the pros and cons of trading Paul George, a potential trade package involving him, and deciding whether overall the Clippers should actually move him this offseason. Before we start, if you're new here and enjoy the video, be sure to subscribe for more NBA content like this. I'm trying to hit 14,000 subscribers by November. We're under 100 subscribers away from that goal, so all support would be greatly appreciated. Anyway, with that all being said, let's talk about the LA Clippers and Paul George. Firstly, why would the Clippers even want to trade Paul George? What would they be looking for? Well, obviously, PG's latest playoff performances were very poor, as he shot the ball horrifically. His decent regular season averages of 21 points per game on 41% shooting from 3 dropped substantially. Not really his points per game output, but definitely his efficiency. His field goal efficiency dropped by 4% to under 40%, which is appalling for a player of his caliber. And his 3-point percentage dropped by 8% to 33%, which is also unacceptable. I understand he went through some mental health issues with the whole bubble environment, which I do sympathize for him with, but his lack of an impact on the Clippers during such an important run was intolerable. This season was basically championship or bust for LA, whether PG admits that or not, and to choke yet again in the second round is embarrassing for the franchise. I must preface that this is not all PG's fault. The role players like Lou Williams were also quite shocking during this run, and in Game 7, pretty much every player on the team choked, but Paul George's inability to step up during the bubble definitely hurt LA. That is why the Clippers may consider trading Paul George. His proven unreliability in the playoffs and negative impact on the team may be enough to send him off. So, what would the Clippers be looking for in a package back? Well, according to rumors and reports, the Clippers are looking to target a point guard this offseason. The lack of help in regards to offensive production in the playoffs hurt the Clippers big time, so they really need a guy who can go get them a bucket when needed, aside from Kawhi, as well as someone who can play make to a pretty high standard, which Lou Williams and Patrick Beverley simply cannot do. Before we get into a trade package involving Paul George, let's take a look at the pros and cons of trading PG first, starting with the pros. The first big pro in my opinion is getting some better role players around Kawhi. It sucks to say for Leonard, but he had the perfect roster built around him in Toronto, and I think they would have been a real shot to go back to back had he stayed. But now in LA, he's in a tough position. With a Paul George trade, though he loses the second star, Kawhi is likely to get back some high quality role players and starters that could almost improve the Clippers roster from what it is now. As I said, I'll go over a trade soon, but if the Clippers get the right package, moving PG could be a benefit for Kawhi, and in turn, LA's success. Another pro is that it might be simply too risky to keep Paul George on board, so getting rid of him could be a positive for their long-term success. If the Clippers fail again next season, Kawhi and Paul George might dip in free agency, which puts the Clippers in a terrible place as they traded virtually all their draft picks for him last offseason. Trading him away for solid role pieces and good draft picks could be viewed as beneficial, as at least they could start a rebuild if Leonard does leave next summer. The point is here, they are getting something back for Paul George. which might not happen if they decide to run it back. So those are the two biggest pros, in my opinion, for the Clippers trading Paul George in general. However, there are definitely some negatives the Clippers will need to weigh up before they decide to move him. So, let's take a look at those cons. The first con is this trade just might be too soon and premature. In reality, this is just one playoff run, and it occurred in some strange circumstances likely to never occur again. So to say this could just be a one-off is a possibility. Obviously, he has underperformed in the playoffs before, but had this been a regular season, maybe he performs better. He has openly admitted he's struggled to conform to the bubble environment. PG-13's play has been halted by injuries the last couple seasons as well, which could have affected his play, and we have to remember, he was a legit MVP candidate a couple years ago, so I don't suggest giving up on him too soon. Overall, it was really a stretch of 2 to 3 months that PG struggled, and for the other part of this season, he was actually very good in his second option role on LA. To trade him instantly after that could be considered harsh, especially considering the circumstances they were in. Another con is the Clippers would probably regress by trading him, but it all depends on the deal. As I mentioned earlier, a trade involving Paul George could improve the Clippers team, but it could also hurt them. If the Clippers trade PG and what they get back doesn't gel into their system as planned, it would be a horrific decision for them, as Kawhi Leonard would likely leave in free agency in 2021 as a result. This is going to be a very tough decision the Clippers must make, and it'll be interesting to see what they do. With that being said though, what is a potential trade package involving Paul George and another team that would reap benefits for both sides? One team that has been involved in trade rumors in the search for Paul George is the Brooklyn Nets, as according to reports, they wish to secure a third star. So, what would a package look like between the Clippers and Nets for Paul George? The Brooklyn Nets would receive Paul George for Jarrett Allen, Spencer Dinwiddie, Caris LeVert, and some first-round picks. For the Nets, this is a great deal. Though guys like Dinwiddie and LeVert were excellent at times during the season and stepped up big time in the absence of Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant, they'll obviously be less needed next season, so I don't think losing them is that big of a deal. Paul George is the all-star they've reportedly been searching for, and though I think his fit is pretty mediocre with the team, he'll still improve the roster and probably put them as the team to beat next season. Regardless of his struggles these past playoffs, PG is an excellent NBA player. He was an MVP candidate just a couple seasons ago, so this would be a huge deal for the Brooklyn side. For the Clippers, I actually love this deal for them. Firstly, getting the first round picks is massive, as they've basically lost all of their own when they originally dealt for Paul George last offseason. Secondly, getting a point guard in Dinwiddie is fantastic. As I mentioned earlier, the Clippers need a point guard ASAP that can create offense outside of Kawhi, and Dinwiddie is an excellent fit for that role. He's proven in Brooklyn he can step up when needed, and I believe he can do that as well in LA. LeVert and Allen are also great young talents who can add to the depth of the Clippers roster. LeVert has potential to be an all-star caliber scorer, and in my eyes would be a good second option. The Clippers also struggled to contain star big men in the playoffs, so adding extra depth and versatility there with Jarrett Allen is great as well. Overall, I'm a big fan of this deal with both sides, so if the Clippers do decide trading PG is the best route, then this should be an offer they put forward with Brooklyn. But in the end, what did the Clippers do here? Do they trade Paul George? Unfortunately, there is a lot on the line here, so the pressure is really on the front office. If they trade Paul George, they minimize the risk of running it back and potentially losing both Kawhi and PG in free agency next summer. and they'll gain some building blocks to support Kawhi next season and for their future. However, this could still backfire, and trading away PG after only a short slump may be too soon and harsh. In my eyes, it all comes down to how LA views the pros and cons I mentioned and the many more. If they believe the positives of trading PG outweigh the negatives, then they'll probably go ahead and make the trade. But if it's the other way around, they might run it back for perhaps the last time with this squad. Whatever they decide, the result of it will have a huge implication on their future. It could bring them vindication or send them down the rabbit hole yet again. Hindsight though is 2020, and we're all just going to have to wait and see what happens. And that will conclude the video. What do you guys think of this? Should the Los Angeles Clippers trade Paul George this offseason? Do the benefits outweigh the disadvantages in your eyes? Let me know all your thoughts down in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to drop it a like and subscribe. But with that being said, I am out. Peace.